Okay, here we go. Today, more than ever before, we live our lives online, sharing pictures and videos with friends and family, expressing opinions online, and turning to social media sites as the place where everyone knows your name. The internet has been an amazing connector, but it's also introduced some really awkward moments. It's made mistakes seem like forever, and secrets impossible to hide. Living a public life online is no longer optional, but that doesn't mean that the internet should be unruly or unsafe. Congratulations for investing in the privacy of your family by joining us today on AI Parenting Live. We are a judgment free community moving from screen time to quality time. And our motto is don't sedate, relate to create. And today we are so excited to learn the proven ways to create a privacy conscious household from none other than the data diva herself, Debbie Reynolds. Debbie
Hi.
is a Hi Debbie. Debbie's a world-renowned technologist, company advisor, and consultant handling global data privacy, cybersecurity, uh, and cyber data breaches and the response for those. She's also a top media presence about global data privacy, data protection, and emerging technology. Her podcast, The Data Diva Talks, privacy was listed as a top 5 data privacy podcast. And what I personally love about Debbie is that she speaks to a topic that is so important for families. And she is prolific, especially on her LinkedIn profile. Debbie is an excellent example of what creating disruption in our world looks like in our digital age. So, again, welcome, Debbie. It's good to have you.
Thank you so
Uh,
much for that wonderful introduction. That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr.
It's well deserved. It's well deserved. Before we begin, I would love it if you could think back to a time before the Data Diva. Like, what made you want to become so dedicated to privacy in the first place?
That is a fantastic question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that particular thing. I think growing up, I love the fact that I could have anonymity. And even as a kid, I liked my privacy. I thought when I grow up, oh, I'm gonna like do all these things, and I'm going to, have these private spaces and different things like that. And as I was growing up and getting into the world, I started to see how that was probably not going to end up being the case. In 1997, I read a book called The Right to Privacy, and they were talking about what's private and what isn't, especially in the US. And I was very shocked by that because I think in the US, we have this whole thing about, we have all these freedoms, it's the home of the brave and things like that.
Mm.
And I thought privacy was part of that, and it really isn't in the way that I want it. So for me, I've always been someone who's been interested in how can I have more privacy for myself. And then as the digital age started to come in more and more, I saw how those privacy, those lines start to get redrawn in a way. So I think we have a lot less privacy than we did, before the digital age. And then I think, me as an individual, I want to be able to have more agency or more privacy or more control, if I can, over my data. So that sort of led me into, that was my personal interest, but then I can help businesses and consumers as well to be able to find ways to have more control over their data, or at least more understanding about what happens with their data so they can make better choices.
Hmm. So I love what you said there, and it makes me think a little bit differently about the just the in general the work that you're doing, and like because you describe privacy and freedom, and to me this is the key one that I believe is like like, I guess the question is like, why privacy? Like, who cares, right? Like, so we give up our data, to the likes of Facebook, to the likes of others. And we ask the question of like, well, why is privacy such a big deal? And I think that one of the key messages that I got was that in our world of like social media, privacy is all you got, right? Like if you wanted to say like I don't like Facebook or I don't like the way that they're doing something, you have no like your data is all that you can do. You can move your data elsewhere, maybe, right? If you're lucky. Like for the most part, they don't even delete your stuff, right? Like they just keep it
Yeah.
there. And so like really in our world, we will never have freedom. We will never have a democratic type of environment on the internet unless we have privacy. It's like that so fundamental. I'm just starting to realize that like privacy and freedom, like they're actually on the internet. They're the same thing. We just don't realize it because like these people, we say, oh, they're giving us so many services. Like Google is giving you so many services. But if that is at the cost of your privacy, then if you ever wanted to be private, like you couldn't even use their services. Like that whole world would not be accessible to you. And
Right.
so, very, very important. I'm thank you for sharing that.
I know someone had told me once that, when someone says they don't have anything to hide, when they talk about
Mhm.
privacy, but you have a lot that you want to protect, right? So, would you live in a
Yeah,
house that had no
totally.
locks on the door? No, absolutely. That sounds crazy, right? So,
That's a good point.
you're protecting what belongs to you. So, that's the correlation that I like to tell people about privacy.
That is such a good point, actually. Like when you say it that way, you're like, actually, privacy is like the most important thing, and you would put locks. And what is the equivalent of like locks on the internet? It's your privacy,
Right.
right? So exactly, like you've got such a good point there. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so if we were to go a little bit further, one of the things that I'm reminded of is that there are three aspects that we're going to cover today, and I'd love to get right into them. But the key here is we're live. We are, if you have questions, and thank you for joining us live. I can see we already got some folks um, online on Periscope. Thank you. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or send me a message. Or happy to put them in, and I'll keep like putting some comments and stuff below. The three today we are covering the topic of being proactive about our privacy. This is something that's going to require some planning, and how do we make sure that we have the best practices in as soon as we can, or if we're currently at a state where we're already sharing a lot of stuff, what should we do? And so we'll talk first about some ideas for privacy rules. We will talk a little bit about us being in this post-consent world. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the future of privacy. So without further ado, I'd love for us to jump right into it. So Debbie, if I can ask for your perspective on this, what do you think is when it comes to the first one, family rules? Like, are there any like rules or guidelines that you found particularly helpful when it comes to protecting your privacy? Like, what do we need to know? What do we need to do in order to make sure that that's protected?
There are a couple things. One is I think you need to be purposeful in how you share data and why you share it.
Mm,
Every website that you go to, they'll say, "Can we, accept cookies? We track this or that." So you want to be able to make sure that you do it with purpose, right? So let's say, would you give your social security number to a game? You probably say, no, I probably, I don't think that they need that information. There's no law against them asking for that information. But I think we need to be better consumers about how we decide we share information. One other thing that I think that I had growing up, I grew up in a household where we had one TV in our house, and it was in a public area of the house. So it wasn't like, our parents could monitor what we were watching and what we were doing. And now, every room has a TV, everyone has a phone, everyone has a tablet, and especially as a parent, it's hard to monitor all that stuff. So it takes a lot more work, I think, for parents in that regard. And then one thing I always try to tell parents is that, and this is a very specific thing, which is, a lot of us, we have devices in our homes that invite surveillance, right? So which
Yeah.
are, it could be the Ring doorbell, it could be the vacuum cleaner is going around your house, the smart speaker, the
Your
smart
vacuum cleaner is spying on you.
yeah, it's
Oh
mapping your
no.
house. Right, exactly.
Oh,
And with 5G, all these things are going to start to talk to one another, which is a whole other thing. But one thing I try to
IoT.
tell parents to do is I don't recommend that they have smart speakers in private areas with their children. So, we
Ooh, so like a lot of people do, like that's exactly the place that they put them. Like they'll put them in their living room and stuff. And so like what's the risk of that?
Well, I'll say a common area I would be fine with, but like a private area, like a kid's bedroom, be problematic because we've seen people hack those devices. And you can have someone like a grown up that you don't know trying to
Really?
talk to your kid and you don't even know it through those devices. So you want, if you
Really?
have,
Like
oh
like
yeah,
they speak to your kids through the device. Well, I've
yeah,
never. Oh wow. Okay.
totally creepy, totally
That
creepy.
is super creepy.
So yeah,
Oh.
if you want a smart speaker, have it in a common area in the house. Don't put it in
Yeah,
your
absolutely. Especially if
children's
a stranger is going to be
bedrooms.
talking to my kids.
Right,
Like, oh my
exactly,
goodness. Okay.
exactly.
Wow. Okay, that changed my perspective. Before we go on, I want to say hi to Alice. Thank you for joining us. It's good. Like we've got quite a few here, and anytime. Yes, Alice is also saying, yeah, that's super scary. Agree, agree. So, 100%. And I think if you can maybe dive a little bit into, if this is okay. Why is this still showing? Okay. So one of the things that you said is basically this is a fight that a lot of families have right now. It's a huge fight. Like I know that when I was growing up too, um, yeah, absolutely, technology, like was mostly in a public space. So we had the TV, and if we had a computer, it was in a public space. Everything was like public that we did on computers. And nowadays, like it's so easy, it's so accessible to get like a device for every single individual in their bedrooms. And there's this notion, like this thing that kids really are frustrated about is they wish that they could have more privacy. Like they wish that like why are my parents taking away the door from my room? Why is it like why? How come I have no privacy in this house? So this is like new expectation of privacy that we maybe didn't have when we were growing up. So to those individuals, like say the younger generation, like if you were to justify like why you've got those, like why make it public? Why does it need to be like why do you need to use technology in a public space? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think parents need to be very aware of what's going on with their children, and it's hard to do that if they're using devices or communicating with people that you don't know. There are bots on the internet. People can conceal their true identity. They may think they made a friend that's 13-year-olds, a 13-year-old, maybe a 40-year-old man from a different state. We've seen, kids be manipulated in ways that parents may not have even known about because they kids are using phones or using computers and talking to people that they don't know about. So I think it makes the job of a parent just so much harder now. But I think
Mhm.
kids need to understand that parents are trying to protect them and they really need to be involved in what's going on, especially things like bullying. Like that's a huge issue where, you know, let's say growing up, let's say you're growing up and you went to school, you had a bully. When you went home, you weren't being bullied, right? But
Yeah,
on the internet, that bullying
you're
continues
bullied all the time
24
now.
hours
Yeah.
away, a
Mm,
day, right? So that could
mm.
be a situation where kids are despondent. They have things going on that you may not be aware of, and it could be really detrimental to the health of the kid.
And so this is a growing divide between the parents and kids in general. And this is really near and dear to my heart, like because so many on one hand, parents are like, I need to know what's going on, right? But they also kind of feel like, because we grew up in this environment where we didn't have social media all the time, and so
Oh,
everything that's happening right now seems so wrong to us. And so, to a certain extent, many parents just dismiss this altogether. And that relates to Alice's question, which I thought was really good. Like, if we were to flip this around and we were to ask, like, how can we educate parents, more parents, to take safety, who like they maybe they take the safety of things on the internet for granted, because they just don't know. Like, they're just not aware of anything, and maybe they're not interested in being aware of any of the stuff that their kids do online. Like, what would you recommend? Like, what would you say to those parents?
yeah. I would say, the internet is like, there are really no guardrails, right? There are very few rules about what happens on the internet. So the safety of a kid is really up to the kid, unless, obviously there are regulations that relate to children, and they tend to be pretty good. But I think those regulations don't go far enough, because a lot of those regulations are based on consent. So if you say yes, and maybe, you know, not only with children, but also adults. A lot of times when we're saying yes, we don't know what we're saying yes to, right? A lot of people don't read those 80 pages or terms or conditions or the privacy policies and stuff like that. So you don't really know. So I think for me, I would be limiting, and this is funny. So my father, I had to put like a parental control for him, because I wanted
Oh,
to make sure he wasn't going doing crazy things on the internet. To limit, find out what he liked, and then put that stuff on his tablet, and then lock down other things. So I mean, I think that's a good way for parent, especially if you want to give a device to have a kid to play and do whatever. You don't want them getting in trouble or whatever. So you want to be able to have a way to give them some freedom, right? But then have some guardrails around it. So I think the parents have to bring the guardrails, because the internet is not going to do that.
hmm. It's a great point, and it's interesting that you mentioned your father, like, having to put some restrictions on that too, because in the same way, like, some many parents aren't aware of what is really happening when they're doing all this posting and liking. It seems like pretty innocent to just like, hey, I just like this photo, or hey, I just posted this thing, and but they're not understanding the full terms and conditions. They're not understanding the full implications of what they are uploading, and how that could be shared or potentially used against, maybe the grandkids, or maybe others, in the future, maybe themselves. Like, maybe it's not that big a deal for them. But I do know that, like, for a lot of people, when, like, we were using the internet, like, when I was young, like, it was for fun, right? Like, it's no
Right.
big deal, no consequences. We didn't remember everything. But nowadays, it's like, I know, absolutely, we do. Like, we store all that stuff, and we don't delete it. Even if you say you deleted your account, it's like, that doesn't mean that your stuff gets deleted. And so we have to think about things differently. And now it's like, you can't get a job without one of these, like, social media profiles. Like, your employers won't even know what you do. And so it's becoming a requirement. And
Right.
people think like, oh, it's just like your photos that you upload, but it's not, right? Like, it's other things like watch time, right? So they're measuring, like, oh, this person like watches this type of video a lot. And so you're if you're not controlling this, right? For example, like, people's subconscious usually controls like how many milliseconds they watch. You're uploading your, like, a version of your unconscious mind, right? Like, what are the
Right.
things that you deeply desire inside? It's like, people don't think, oh, I'm just browsing, whatever. Like, it's no big deal. It's like, no, you are sharing a lot of information with companies all the time.
Absolutely.
So, that what you mentioned about the terms of service, so it brings me to the next point, which I think is really, really great, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it, which is, uh, consent. So, like, you deal a lot with the legal side of contracts and stuff, and I'm very curious about this world of consent, because it feels like, first of all, like, terms of service may change at any point in time, and you have no choice. Like, you must consent to whatever the new things are. Or you need to stop and terminate your use of this service. And so, like, and even if you do or do not consent, like we have learned from the likes of Edward Snowden, that it doesn't matter. You, like, for example, location tracking that is done through cell phone networks is happening with or without your consent. There's like a law that says, like, yeah, we're just going to track you for safety purposes, and we're never going to delete that information. And so, like, what do we do? Like, this is a growing concern about parents. It's like, we don't have a choice. Like, what does consent even mean these days, and what can we do?
Wow, that's a big question. Uh,
I will.
cons-
I'm only giving you the hard ones, I guess. I apologize.
no, no, no. It's a great question. Consent is here to stay, so you're going to hear that a lot. The issue with consent. So let me back up. Consent, as it relates in a legal sense, is, this is what a business will want to have from a consumer about how they share information, right? So they definitely want your consent, right? So before you can even read almost anything, they want to say, say yes, 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 yes to whatever it is, and then we do whatever. And then, I don't know about you, but you're getting, as terms of service change, they're sending new emails. Oh, we're changing our terms of service. We want you to say yes, 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 to everything. So that's the way the world is going to be now, I think. Even, in the US. So let me back up with the GDPR in Europe. When it came
Mhm.
out, it was very adamant on consent, right?
Yeah.
So basically, they're saying there are like six legal bases that business can use data of individuals, and one of them is consent, and consent is the like kind of the last one. And people want to use other business want to use other things because those other things mean that they don't necessarily have to ask the individual for consent. But if you have situations where you have businesses that are giving services to consumers, that may be the first thing they have to do because they're making changes and stuff like that. The problem with consent is that you can consent to a lot of things. There may be granularity brought into what you can consent to. Companies are struggling with situations where people withdraw consent, right? So you need to be able to have the ability or agency to say, okay, I consented to all these things, but now I changed my mind and I want to do something else. So that's kind of a struggle that I think businesses are having because a lot of the data that we're collecting or the systems that they're using, they were meant to be permanent. So they were meant to not ever delete anything. So you're
Right.
sort of going against the grain of how a lot of these technologies were even built to work. So I think, you know, we as consumers really need to get savvy about what we're saying yes to. And like you said, you know, some things you can't even use without, if you don't consent, you can't use it, right? So it's not like you have that much of a choice. So the choice is use it or not, but be savvy about, what you're saying yes to.
Okay, so can you so I'm hearing that like the issue of consent is getting a little bit muddier, simply because of like other regulations such as GDPR increasing the requirements, but it's still a little bit like fuzzy for me. And I'm wondering if we use Alice's example, she was saying that like we are starting to see a little bit more of this in education, and she is wondering, like, like a back end AI, for example, collecting information about students. And I'm wondering, okay, let's say we had a situation of education, and that there is a point of consent, but like even for them, like we're dealing with minors, like maybe they don't have that ability to consent until 13 years of age
Right.
legally. It's kind of like a different set of rules. And so who's consenting? It's generally the parent consenting on behalf of the child. And then the question is like, generally, I don't know like what can be done. I know in France they have like specific rules where you as an adult can like request the stuff that is about you like before 13 years of age like deleted, but I don't know what rights you have in other regions like the United States. But do you have any insights on like what can be done? Like what does like let's say I already gave consent, like what does withdrawing consent mean in different regions? Like do you still
Yeah.
have that right to like take stuff away, or is it only when like in certain countries that you have that right, or is this a new thing in the world of privacy?
Yeah, it's different from country to country, right?
Yeah.
In terms of what they will be able to do. So you're right about consent. So the kid is, different things kick in under 13, 16, 18, right? So once a child gets 18, and this is a situation we're seeing where kids going to college, right? So not every college kid is 18 years old. So until they're 18, there are things that their parents would need to consent. You would need to still get the parental consent, and then
Can you give some examples?
oh, sure. Right. So let's say you have an app, right?
Mhm.
You have an app that is for teenagers. Uh, so this app for teenagers, they're going to ask you your age, right, and then where you
Mhm.
are, because there are different laws that apply to that. Let's say if the person was using the app when they were 16, so
Mhm.
then they would some through some mechanism there would have to be some parental consent of some sort, and a lot of times it's say a button that says, oh, your parent consented or something. So kick the button.
Is that in the US, or like which regions is that?
That's definitely in the US, but there are other the EU also has kind of these age limitations about what you do, but it's different because um, let's say in the EU, when a kid gets of age, well, they can do that in the US too. If a kid gets of age, they can also go back if the data is still being collected about them, and they can withdraw their consent. So once they hit a certain age, they can have agency over their data, and it won't be something that the parents control. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. Yeah, like I always thought like there was this notion of the age of 13, which was they wouldn't even let you sign up for an account like most social media. And then at 13, like my understanding was like it was a kind of like your internet bar mitzvah, and then like at that point you're like a friggin' adult, and then everything you do is like kept by them. And but I didn't realize that there were like different rules for 16 and 18, and in some cases they can request that stuff gets like taken down, or you need to have the parents' permission before something like that is posted. Then does that also mean that the parents can also take that information back to say like, hey, you know what, like not allowed?
Yeah, parents can withdraw consent on behalf of a minor. Absolutely,
Hmm.
absolutely. But the problem is, so once let's say the kids use the same app, once he turns to 18, and the parents no longer have that power, it goes over to the individual, and then the individual, depending on how this data is kept, they can make other requests. So we've seen in Europe where kids because they have younger ages too for certain things, they can say, I don't, my parents gave consent, but I don't agree. So I want you to take
Oh,
my data
interesting.
down or something like that. So yeah.
I like this, like I think that this is like a small step, but it's a powerful one. Like as an individual, you can consent. Um, what was the example? Like the Gwyneth Paltrow, like sharing photos of her daughter, and her daughter saying like, "Hey, look, we already talked about this. I do not consent to you sharing these photos," right? And it's like that happens, right? Like,
Right.
because as parents, we're very there's that whole term of sharenting, right? Like, oh, we don't want to be like sharing all these things about our child because
Right.
they don't have an ability to consent, and it's tough because we want to talk about our children, and we're very proud of them. But how do we do that in today's age? Is mostly through like how we connect with other parents is like through social media. And
Right.
so parents are always hesitant to do that because like yeah, at some point they might not be very proud of these things, they might want to take them down. But the way I see it is like because they if you focus on their outputs, right, like
Mhm.
like what they create instead of like what they look like when they're that
Right.
age, then it's different, right? Like, and you're focused on what you're proud of about them, not necessarily how they look, right?
Right.
Like, oh, look at how much cute my daughter is, isn't the same thing as look at this thing that she created that is I'm super proud of. Like, she's been making really great progress, and I
Right.
think that there should be some guidelines like that around if you're going to share something, like share what you're proud of, about them because that encourages them too, and other people can say like, yeah, oh, that's really great work. Then
Yeah.
you haven't revealed their identity. You haven't like,
Right.
yeah, put
That's
their name
true.
out, for example.
That's
Yeah.
true. I know. Do we have time to talk about AI in education?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah,
This is
because
a
Alice was asking about that. And, if we're going to move on to the next section, this is like perfect timing, actually.
oh, okay.
Um, because the next one, we're talking a little bit about the future of privacy. And one of the things that we've previously spoke of is this notion of privacy is changing, right? Like we went from like cookie tracking with your ID and your like email address attached, your personal identifiable, to session IDs today. Like many systems like Mixpanel are just the recording of the session. So they're getting data that's just not personally identifiable. Although that's kind of questionable because you may be able to connect the two. And then there's the next step, which is like Flock, like AI, you're training some model. And then as we keep going on these different steps, it feels like you, because it's less connected to you, your rights to that data become lower, right? And your ability to correct that data, especially if it's like an AI, and like we both talked about coded bias and how like AI has these built-in biases. So your ability to say, no, this is like the wrong model, like you're not like this is not an accurate representation of me, becomes less and less because like it's not you. It's some AI model. And I'm curious about like where do you see like what's happening with AI and how does that relate to privacy?
Well, what's happening with AI, there are all these AI advancements that are coming out and it's being pushed out, but uh, there are so many harms that can happen to people that aren't really being addressed in AI, and it's highly problematic, especially in education, in my opinion.
Can
So,
you give some examples?
sure, absolutely. So, there was there because of the pandemic, a lot of kids are working from home, and some of these systems that some educators have put in place had kind of emotion tracking. So, like they would try to determine the emotional state of the child when they were doing work, and so as a result of that, the algorithm would do things like give people. Let's say Sally was not doing well at math. Instead of the teacher saying, "Okay, Sally needs more help in math," the algorithm will say, "Well, let's give Sally less rigorous things to do." Okay. So then they're putting her on a different path. So maybe they'll say, let's show Sally how to bake cakes. Okay. Since she's not good at math or something like that. So there are all these patterns that are being created in AI that can put kids on paths that are detrimental in the future. Who's to say that down the line that Sally isn't going to get into these higher classes? She's going to be closed out from different things just because of an algorithm that said that she was unhappy when she was doing math or something. And that's a huge problem. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I can
you
hear
can't.
you now.
Okay. So to me, this is fascinating because um, in education nowadays, it seems like there's this fork in the road, and it seems like we're either going to move really heavy into this AI proctoring world where everything is like managed like by AI, kind of like freelancing work is kind of determined by an AI. Like how good are you is really dependent on what the algorithm thinks, not what people think. And then in the same way, like education could be headed in very much the same way. And then the other is like we either do that or we move towards creativity. And I don't know, like it seems like the books are stacked towards the proctoring side at this time. And I'm curious, okay, so if it sets you into the wrong direction, like it kind of made some assessment, and this has happened. I remember for hearing in Coded Bias, they talked about like teachers being evaluated, and they said
Right.
like this teacher is not a good teacher because the algorithm said so, right? Even though the teacher may be actually a very good teacher, but it was just because they work with students in a very low socioeconomic status environment that things went like. Of course, the grades are going to be lower. They're going to score worse, and if that's what your AI is looking at, it's just like scores, for example, then you're gonna things are gonna be a problem. And so it kind of makes me wonder, like, okay, so we are aware of these types of biases. Um, what can we do? Like, how do we fight back on these things? Is there legal recourse? Like, what are you gonna do? Like, sue the companies? Like, I don't know.
Well, people are suing those companies, and I think what has to happen is that there has to be a way to bring more transparency into how these algorithms are working and what judgments are being made. And then, the humans also can't abdicate their responsibility. So, in the example that you gave about the teachers and the coded bias, you know, the example they gave was about this teacher had won teacher of the year, year after year, but then this algorithm told him that, he's a bad teacher and they fired him. That to me, that's where a human should step in and say, wait a minute, this is not right, as opposed to saying, well, the algorithm said this and we're gonna, fire this teacher, which is problematic. I think I try to, I think that people are trying to make AI seem like it's a teddy bear and it's actually a grizzly bear. So we need to look at it a lot differently because there can be unintended harms. It's not as though the people who are making these apps are trying to harm people, but they're not looking at the harms in the way that it should be. So I give you another example. So think about blood transfusion, right? So the way blood transfusion works now, if you were to get one, they would figure out what your blood type was, right? Before they gave you blood, or that would kill you. So now the way AI is being rolled out now, it's like, okay, we tested on our friends and they're this blood type and it works. And then now we're going to throw it on everybody and it's supposed to work. It's very dangerous to think of it in that way. So we have to be able to pull it back, pull back the curtain, make it more visible, and have people who can audit and people who are best suited to be able to look at these things. If my blood type is different, okay, I can say, wait a minute, this works on you because you're the person who tested it, but now you're trying to make the leap and try to force it on everyone else. It may not work that way.
Absolutely. Like, this is the concern I have, is that more and more like humans are deferring decisions to our artificial intelligence. And I've always described like AI as not so much a intelligence, but more like an unconsciousness, which just makes automatic decisions, not necessarily good ones, but it just makes them, and it makes them fast. And that's why we end up with so many negative consequences. Like, oh, you're not a good teacher, even though like it's just, it can't handle the exception is basically what it's saying. Or in
Right.
this case, the blood transfusion, it just doesn't know. It lacks some context. Or like a court decision or a health decision. Like all of these decisions are being made and they have very real, like long-term life consequences. And that critical thinking for the computer isn't there. It's just looking for people who are like you. Oh, most people like like this individual. They don't go for more treatment, maybe because they live in lower socioeconomic status environments. So we're just going to recommend less treatment for you. You don't need it.
Right.
Like, and so this relates to what Alice said, and I do appreciate you being so active, Alice. So she said that I'd never heard about that, right? And it's a really big problem. Be interested to know which education programs. I think the one that we were talking about teachers was in Texas, was my understanding.
I
But
think it was
there's
in
going to be
Texas.
like, this is not the only AI proctoring one. Like there's like a
No.
whole section on like AI proctoring. And I think that the big challenge that I see in this space is anxiety, right? Like anybody who's used AI proctoring, where it's just like scanning the environment, they describe like a feeling of like they're already really anxious because of the pandemic and being locked down. But then you
Hmm.
add in, by the way, like while you're taking this test, you have to install this software, and this software is going to basically like be the equivalent of spyware on your computer. It's going to monitor everything, every keystroke, your web camera, your microphones. Like you think like, Facebook is creepy, just wait until you try this stuff. And it was like that's the kind of environment that a lot of people are moving to, and they're like, how is this good? Right? How is this going to be result in something that's going to help our children succeed? I mean, I can see it's good for an administrator who wants like, oh yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do tests online and keep it consistent. I can get that, but I think that the challenge is like you miss the human element, and it's like there's certain things that AI is never really going to be great at. Those like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication skills. And I
Yeah.
was hoping like maybe you could speak a little bit to, okay, let's think like if we threw the clock even further back, right? Like you asked me a question which I thought was really prescient, and it made me think a lot. Was if you had a magic wand, for example, and you could change things, or you had one thing that you could kind of control for the long-term future that you think would be most beneficial for people, what do you think that would be, at least from a privacy like world? What would be the first command of your privacy magic wand?
Oh, you turned the magic wand question on me. Very good. Very good.
Yo, you
Uh,
started it. I love it.
for me, it's about privacy being a human right everywhere where it's not right now. So, privacy is not a fundamental human right in the US and other countries, it's not. So, the thing that happens in the US is that a lot of privacy and a lot of privacy regulation and enforcement happens a lot on the state level as opposed to the federal level. So we do have laws that address privacy on a federal level, only by sectors, but there are a lot of gaps there if you're thinking about um,
Yeah.
consumer versus human rights to privacy. So not every human is a consumer. So a lot of the US laws, especially, are uh, pointed towards consumer. So think about this in terms of economics. If you don't have money to consume, then what privacy rights do you have if those rights are not human? So the example I gave is, let's say you take a picture of you and your grandma, you're on Facebook. You post a picture on Facebook. She decides she doesn't like the fact her picture's on Facebook. She cannot go to Facebook on her own and say, "Hey, I don't like this picture," because she's not a consumer of Facebook. So you would be the only person to be able to do that. So if she wants to take action, or she wanted Facebook to take action about her photo, she would have to become a consumer of Facebook. She would literally have to create an account and say, "Hey, I don't like this picture." You know what I'm saying? So if you're not a consumer, a lot of these rights don't apply to you, and that's why I think it's a huge problem.
So in this case, you're referring to the instance of things like shadow profiles, or maybe like a photo that a friend posted of you, but you don't actually have an account on there. Like because you don't have an account, you literally have no rights to this, because you're like rights only extend to the user. And like to
Right.
me, like, oh, I love what you're saying so much. And one of the reasons for that is um the privacy and human rights thing. Like they seem separate. Like they seem like, oh, it's like not a big deal, like we give up our privacy, what's the big deal? But it feels like in the world of AI, like that's it, that's all you got, right? Like AI, the only thing that an AI is hungry for is data, right? And like the only way to do anything to fight back against a AI is literally to starve it of that data. And if you don't have rights to that data, and it feels like increasingly we have less rights to them, as opposed to more rights, because we try to make them slightly more anonymous, but they're still like, and we think of like data as like, oh, it's just the like these photos that we share, but like we talked about before, it's like no, like you're uploading your like unconscious beliefs, your like unconscious values into that system. we just don't realize that we're doing it. It feels like, this data is a gold mine, right? It's like it's literally like everything that you potentially want to buy in the future. It's literally everything that you believe really strongly, and that would potentially influence how you would vote, how you would purchase. Like a lot of your key career decisions could be determined by what we show you in terms of the ads on this. So it's a really, really important decision, and you have no rights to it.
No.
And so what does it
Right.
mean if we don't have rights to this? Like if our ideal doesn't happen, then what's the consequence of that? Like, so if we kind of like today, like it's interesting because it feels like the rules apply differently. Like if you were the CEO of Facebook and you didn't like something, that thing would be taken down, right? Like there
Totally.
would be no questions asked. Now, if
Right.
you're Joe Blow, right, or somebody like myself, and you're like, I
Right.
don't like this, what's on there, they'd like fight hard to say like, oh well, we're trying to protect freedom of speech, and we can't like have you take down stuff that you don't like, and you don't consent to. Like well, that would be like a violation of freedom of speech. So like, how come like the rules apply differently? So what would we do? What could we do? What would happen if we lived in that? Like, I guess it's what happens if things stay the same?
Yeah, it's problematic because the data collection is only going to get more intense. We're always inviting new technologies into our house, or we're using new stuff.
Mhm.
There's going to be, especially with 5G, computing is going to be computing on steroids at that point, where things are going to be done that we weren't able to do before. A lot of this is going to lead into things like virtual reality, augmented reality, especially in education and medical. Those are two big areas that are seeing that. So as the future comes forward, we're going to have to share even more data about our location, more data about sort of what we do. And some of these applications have to have that. So let's say if you wore virtual reality glasses or goggles, they look like my glasses. You can walk down the street. In order to make sure you didn't possibly walk into the street like look for a Pokemon or something like that, they would need to know your exact location, right? So
Mhm.
you're going to be giving over more data. And then I think it's important that people be an educated consumer. So, is the benefit worth the trade off, that you give for your privacy? So, like, I'll give you an example. So, talk about AirTags. So,
Oh, I
AirTags
love
is a
it.
new thing that Apple put out. So
Yeah.
it's about to find your keys or whatever. But it really is not to find your keys, it's to find you. So it's a way to get your exact location of where you are. And that's going to be something that's going to be very beneficial in the future for new like games or new things that people are putting out that have to do with your location.
Yeah, exactly. Like to me, I've seen so many, like I've been tracking that closely, because on one side we've got Apple saying like, hey, we're protecting your privacy. Look at like in iOS like 14, we've got this ask the app not to track. But it's not that they're not tracking you, it's just that Apple's tracking you instead of instead of Facebook. It's like, yeah, you know what, nothing's really changed. We just want to move more people to our own advertising system. We should get a big piece of that pie.
Yeah.
And then when you look at AirTags and how incredible it is, because it has no location, doesn't have a GPS on it, but so many people have iPhones that like you literally could drive down the street and it'll know where you are just based on that information. And so many people have like mailed an AirTag, to
Yeah.
a different country or different location, and then boom, like every step along the way. Oh, where was it that whole time? It's like if you wanted to, like tracking a person wouldn't be hard, using that. You like stick it to the back of their car. They don't have to consent. You would know exactly where they are.
Yeah. Well, they said that they have something in there that will tell you if someone is trying to track you using AirTag. So someone put a tag on you or whatever, it will let you know if you had iPhone. I guess if you didn't have iPhone, this wouldn't work, right? But if you had iPhone and someone tried to put a tag on you, they said there's something in there that would let you know that something is tracking you, like maybe something in your purse or in your car or whatever. But this goes back to consent again. So you can consent to be tracked by other people if you want to, and then again, these things, think about the contact tracing apps they're putting together for different countries and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Those things, we're using Bluetooth to try to get your proximity to another person, and it's not always exact, right? Because you may not have your Bluetooth on. There are a lot of variables in there that make it not as precise as they want it. So an AirTag will make it very precise. They will know exactly where you are in uh, juxtaposition to where this AirTag would be. So that's what they need. So you're going to probably see a lot of things that will do, like, let's say they want you to have a watch and a phone and AirTag. So so it has to be two things that they can
Mhm.
use to actually find your location. More,
Yeah, it's like triangulation, right? Like if they
yeah,
have like the right number of towers, that it's pretty easy to figure out based on the distance, like your precise location with
yeah,
an AirTag.
exactly.
That kind of leads into Alice's question. She was asking, like, what do people do with these location information? What are they doing with it? And I guess it depends on who you're talking about, right? Like if you're talking about like a company, does a company do? Like they're trying to sell you something in the
Yeah,
location that you're at or based on where you're at. Like, so sell you local stuff. But if it's like a government, it's totally different, right? It's like, no, like I just want to know exactly where you are if I want to track you or do something.
yeah,
Like if I'm worried about you as an individual, I
right.
have like full access to your location at all times.
Yeah, there are many different ways location can be used. So probably the most popular one is, you know, in order for you to get cell service from a mobile phone, they need to know where your phone is, right? So there's that. So that's a purpose that we've all accepted because we all use mobile phones, and we should, right? There is the marketing part of location tracking where, let's say you go near a store and they'll send you a coupon or something, or they want to know, like, let's say they sent you a email, or you clicked on an ad or something. They may want to track you to see if you actually went in the store and made a purchase. Like, that's one thing they want to do. So that's kind of creepy as well. People may not know or understand that type of tracking. uh, there are problematic tracking things that happen where, just like we were talking about this AirTag thing, just having your phone on and having had communications with certain people, they may be able to track your location. And a lot of apps ask for it. So I don't know if you can notice this on your phone. We're like, oh, can we track your location while you're using the app or all the time? It was like, why would I want you to track me all the time? That makes no sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are certain apps, it's like, why would you need that information? I'm curious what they're using it with. So I think location is very important in the future because all these new things they're going to be using location data
Mhm.
for these new applications. But then the flip side of that is that some people can use, for example, let's say, you know, big companies like Apple and Google are trying to do things where they're trying to cut off or give less data to third party companies, right?
Mhm.
That track you. But those third party companies can do things like fingerprinting, where they can take a lot of tangential data about you and then figure out who you are just from that without you
Oh,
telling them who you
interesting.
are. And the part of that is location. So let's say your location is at a certain place between midnight and 6 a.m. in the morning. So they can infer that you live there, right?
That's right.
It's not that hard probably for them to figure all this stuff out. So let's say John, so I'll give you an example. So let's say right now the way tracking is, you know, you can a marketer can get your phone and they know exactly who you are. So you're John who lives on Main Street in Cincinnati. You drink beer, you drive a pickup truck, you have 2 kids. Okay, so maybe the anonymization that the company does is they tell the marketer, okay, somebody lives on Main Street in Cincinnati and drinks beer and drives a pickup truck. But they pretty much, it's not hard for them to figure out that it's John.
That's right. Like this, I was saying, like session ID is like so easy to get back to the same person. Like you have so many things in common with other people. Fingerprinting a person is like trivial for the most part. And I think Alice's question also relates to the other component about, like we talked about consent. Now we consent to tracking, but we often have no transparency as to what they are actually doing with said data. Like the general assumption is we'll do whatever we want with this data.
Right.
And I think that that's the real challenge, is that we can't ask these companies, what do you want our location for? Why are you using this data? Because we just consent on broad to the use of tracking and any type of analytics with it. And it's like, are we ever going to get to a point where we'll start to have some transparency on, that's great, you're tracking this information. What are you going to do? Why do you need to track this information?
Right. I think we're getting there. A lot of the regulations that are coming out now are very much tying data tracking or data collection to purpose. So where in the past it was like, let's collect as much as we can and then we figure out later what we want to do with it. Now they're saying even before you collect the data, you have to have a purpose. So I'm hoping as a result of that, there'll be more transparency into what companies are doing. But really, what they want you to do is consent, so then they can do whatever they want with it. So, and the problem is the transparency again. So it's not evident to you as a consumer what all they're going to do with the data. They just want you to consent to whatever it is that they want to do with the data. And I think in the future, what's going to happen is less people. So people are going to share more data with less companies. That's what's going to happen in the future. And these other companies that are going to be left out, they're going to start to try to give financial incentives to people to share. So they'll say, oh, let me give you this coupon or let me give you this, whatever, so that you can give me more information about you. So I think that's where we're going in the future.
Oh, that's really interesting. We have covered so much ground today, and I really appreciate. I just want to emphasize that I think that may be a good future like place to end. It's like this transparency. The more we can get transparency, the more like we'll be able to make an informed decision as to, do I want you to track or not? It's like you don't even know for the most part like why they need to do it, and that's generally not a right that we have. But if we move towards it, I think that would be really beneficial. Now, a little bit, I was going to ask you, if people want to get in contact with you, Debbie, do you have any recommendations for like sites or, social media to get in contact, like if they want to learn more?
Sure. So you can go to my website, DebbieReynoldsConsulting.com. I have a lot of my stuff on there, links to my podcast. I have my podcast, Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast, is on all the major directories and stuff like that. And then I'm always looking to connect with people on LinkedIn. So you can type in Debbie Reynolds Data Diva. I think I'll pop right on up there. People can connect with me there. I'll try to post a couple times a week, pretty good content. I try to post my podcast episode and a video at least once a week. And then I also do a lot of commenting on stuff that comes up.
Oh. I said at the beginning, Debbie is incredible. Like you should see her stuff. She's always posting something there. She's very consistent. She is a great example of what like really great creation is. So if you haven't checked out her LinkedIn, like this is a great way of like just seeing what like creation, like a really great example of what like a prolific creator, at least in our digital world, looks like. I'm also kind of curious. Like I noticed you got like the nice cans. You've got the nice like microphone. what are you using like as your equipment for? This is like the same stuff you use for podcasts, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm just
So
curious, like what is that?
yeah, so I have a Blue Yeti microphone. It's fantastic. They even have a podcast mode on the microphone, so it makes it sound really good. Very easy.
Really? Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then I use I think it's called Audio Technica
Yeah,
headset. So it's very good quality sound that comes
that's
from it.
awesome.
So I highly
We'll leave
recommend it.
some like links, I guess, on the Amazon Live. You can see what they are. But the Blue Yeti and the Audio Technica, like they sound great. I was gonna
Yes,
say it's like you've
I
got
even have a
a great,
fan.
yeah.
I have a fan blowing. And you can't even really hear it here, so it's pretty
Not at
good.
all. Yeah. Like I was kind of expecting like, oh, there'd be like a lot of fan noise, but no, it's like you've got to it sounds really good. It's coming out really clear. And once again, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's not just myself, but also Alice. Thank you so much for joining us this time. She had said that like it was very informative. I think it's just a good testament to all the really good information that you shared today. And I hope that with today we start to think about privacy potentially in a different light, in a different perspective. Maybe treat it with a new level of priority for families. It sounds like, you actually don't have human rights, on the internet if you don't have privacy. It seems like it feels like it's like not a big deal. It's like I just give them all my data, but you actually give up your rights. How you give up your human rights actually to online when you do this. And I think that was a key message. And so if you were to like if people forgot everything that they learned today, there was like one piece of information that you really wanted people to just take home and remember, what might that be, Debbie?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to protect what's out of your control. So be purposeful about what you put on the internet, especially because it's easier to not put it on the internet than it is to try to control it once it's on the internet. So that would be my best advice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So being aware of like what are the consequences once we have stuff, putting it out there, and then making sure it's very, very clear. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I think next week we are still confirming the speaker, but I want to thank you for your time because I think that this has been very helpful. We've learned a lot in this time, and I think that Debbie, like, will hopefully, we'll stay in contact. You're doing some great work. I think a lot more parents need to hear this stuff because seriously, like this, not enough that consider privacy in this space. And I never thought about it this way until I started like having these conversations with you. And it kind of made me think like, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Like privacy is all we got, on the internet.
Yeah,
You can't go and vote in a new CEO for Facebook. You can't vote in, like, all you can do is vote with your data.
that's right.
That's it. You could
That's
say
right.
like, no, you can't have my data, or yes, you can have my data. Like
That's right.
that's all you got in terms of rights.
Exactly.
And so if you don't do that, you've got no control.
That's right.
So
That's right.
very important. Very important. Thank you again. And to everyone who's joining us online, thank you. We appreciate you. We will see you all next week. Thank you.